guys, Joe here, and man, I need to take a second to celebrate because this is my 19th Drift video. It is the final one that I'm recording for the Drift release, and wow, it's been a long journey. And if you're using Morph, you're probably going to be an advanced user. This stack is not for the faint of heart, okay? I will show you the super basics at the beginning, and then we're going to dive into the weeds, okay? There's a lot going on here. The stack is pretty magical though, right? I'm sure you've already seen the demo. You can do really amazing stuff like that. Like that is just mind-boggling how it takes a shape. Okay, and I can't take credit for this. This is from the GreenSock team over at, the GSAP team at GreenSock. And wow, I mean, this is just magical. How we can go from one shape to another. Not only that, but it looks so fluid. And here I added a little bounce to it. Like, pretty mind-blowing. To get this, though, is quite a bit of work. Okay? Just like anything, really awesome, takes some work. Okay? But let's look at the defaults. So let's just look at this SVG really quick. Again, we're going to dive into the weeds a little bit later. But right now, I have my SVG. I have two paths. I have this first path here is the square. And if you notice, it has an ID of square. And this path is the star. You'll notice that it has an ID of star. You have to add IDs to your paths in order for motion path to work. It's the only way it will work. Okay. So next up is inside Morph SVG. We're going to say, what is our start path? We're starting from a square. I guess here I have SVG class, and that is, kind of a parent to your SVG. So here we have an SVG stack. I have Morph on that. So inside Morph, we're looking for multiple IDs. We're going to be looking for square, and we're going to be looking for star. We're going to start from square. We're going to finish at star. Let's go ahead and look at that. We've already seen that. Okay. Now, what are some of the other things? Let's go from the morph type. Okay, so we can go from rotational. I think it's nicer looking to linear. Not sure if you can really notice the difference there. Let's switch back to morph or to rotational. If you look at it, it just has kind of a more movement feel. Okay, now you can change the origin here. And I mean, most of the time you're going to want it the origin at the center. But if we do, I don't know, like 25, 50, you can kind of see. All right, let's make it a little bit more drastic here. As you see there, the origin, the center of the morph is happening over here. Okay, if you look up here, kind of makes things funky. Okay, but depending on the shapes that you're morphing, okay, you're going to want to move that center point to be somewhere. It happens to be the center point for both these shapes that I chose for this example. It's going to be dead smack in the middle. Okay. But definitely play around with that. If you have some odd, oblong shapes, the center origin might not be the point, right? So you're going to have to find at what point is going to be the center of your animation or of your rotation. Okay. Or you can just go with linear and just call it quits. Okay. But the rotation, you have to find that center of where things are going to be rotating. The next setting here is prioritize. And I would always start with the default of size, right? A lot of this morphing, you're going to spend a lot of time tweaking things and testing animation and testing settings out. And one of the things you're going to test is if your things aren't morphing properly, change this prioritization. Okay. We're not going to really notice that here. But again, just depending on the SVG shapes that you have, you might need to, change one of these. I would always start with size. Hopefully that's just going to work out. It just bases, there's a full explanation here in the tooltip. It's basically where the morph plugin, how is it going to match up point A to point B for each point? Is it going to be based on the size of that particular component, the position of those points, and then a complex algorithm that is definitely going to be more resource intensive to do the animation, okay, with the complexity prioritization. Next up, these other settings here, we're going to dive into these a little bit later. I'll give you a quick overview of them now. Convert shapes to pixels. If you're SVG, in our SVG, you'll notice that they're all paths. Okay. I recommend you convert all of your shapes because in SVG, there's shapes such as circle, rect, ellipse. I recommend you export all of those as paths. Okay. Because paths are what is required to make this happen. So that you can, if we're going from, you can't go from a circle to a square, but you can go from a path to a path. Okay. Therefore, this square, this checkbox, this checkbox allows you to automatically convert those to paths, but I recommend you do that in your SVG editor. So that way this plugin, it doesn't take extra page resources, just doing something that you can do already beforehand in your SVG editor. Next is define a custom path index. This has to do with debugging Morph, and we're going to dive into that. And lastly, pre-compiling. This is the ultimate in performance. And once you really have things fine-tuned, I'm going to recommend that you use this, and we're going to dive into that. Okay. Now we're about to dive into the weeds. And to do that, we're going to start off with an SVG. Okay, so here we are inside Affinity Designer. Now, I think Affinity Designer does a really good job at exporting about one actual kind of flaw. I think it's a bug. I'm not sure, but we'll dive into that in a little bit. Now, I will supply this file as a download as an SVG file on the Drift product page. So make sure you check that out. You can go ahead and download this exact file and then open it in Affinity Designer or whatever your favorite vector imaging app is. Now, one thing to note is I've named my layers, right? So all of the layers here have names. And what's nice about Affinity when we export this as an SVG is all of the names for your layers are going to be assigned to the ID. So that's one bit kind of handled for us. Now, if you notice the types of layers here, this heart one is a curve, the square is a rectangle, the ellipse is a circle, or the circle is an ellipse, and the star is a curve. Now, I created all of these using just the standard shape tools inside Affinity. Now, when we export this as an SVG, this curve, anything that's a curve should be exported as a path. And as I told you earlier, we want to make sure that everything is a path. Now, in order to change this rectangle and this circle, we basically select the layer, we right click, and we say convert to curves. And let's go ahead and do the same thing on this square. We're going to right click and say convert to curves. And in theory, all of these should export as a path. Let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to go ahead and file. We're going to export. I'm going to do SVG for export. We're going to export this. Let's just call it Morph 2. And here's our SVG that got exported. You notice that all the IDs are there. That is awesome. It's a great start. However, the star is a path, the heart is a path, but the circle and rectangles are not. They're still circle and rectangle elements. So that is a little annoying. I wish Affinity would really export all curves as a path. That would be really nice. I searched and searched and searched. I could not find how to get Affinity to do that. If you know how, please post it on the community. I'd love to know. It would be nice, and I'm sure other people would appreciate it as well. So we're going to have to do a little bit of work here in order to get this working with Morph. Okay? At least this will work, but without that convert setting that we saw earlier. So let's go ahead and copy this. Let's copy. Okay. I'm going to go back into RapidWeaver, and let's go ahead and I'm just going to paste this in. Okay, directly into my SVG stack. Now, remember, since all of these didn't start off as paths, we're going to have to convert these shapes to paths inside the Morph SVG stack. Okay, let's go ahead and check that, and let's preview. And there we go. Now, if you look, this animation is a little bit different. right? But let's go ahead and let's preview in the browser. And if we open up the inspector and inspect that SVG, we will notice that we have paths for everything now. Okay. So what we can do is I can go ahead and I can right click on this and I can say copy HTML. Okay. And then what we're going to do is I'm now going to go back into RapidWeaver and I'm going to paste that bad boy in there. So now everything that I have is a path, so I don't need that any longer. Now the animation it's not looking as nice as I'd like, right? Let's go ahead and tweak some of these things. Let's just start tweaking this. And actually, another thing I can do, I'm going to change this time to scroll based instead of click based. Okay, let's go into Morph. All right, so now every time I change this, okay. Okay, so let's time to take this game up a notch. And we're going to go to the next level of debugging here. And what we're going to do is I'm going to go ahead and add in Morph Svg Helpers. Okay. And we're going to have to give our SVG a class. And so this one, it was just a class of Morph. Okay. And we're going to help find out the index. We have two helpers here. We can help find an index and we can help find the origin. And then you have to give the start and end path IDs. Okay. We're still going from square to a star. All right. So let's go ahead and preview this now. And what you'll notice now is we have kind of a little debugger to help us animate or help us figure things out. Okay. And this is what's something called a shape index. And so what this does is it's going to help us figure out where the points are and how to map them. So what we're going to do is we're just going to click through this and we're going to get different animations here. And once we find one that we like, oh, that's not good. We're getting farther away. That's pretty close. All right, we're going to go with shape index 0. Now, if you remember, it was auto before with shape index 1. Let's go with shape index 0. Okay, so let's go ahead and we're going to go into our Morph SVG. We're going to just say define custom shape index, and we're going to set that to be 0. So next up, let's go to our origin. Let's start debugging and figuring out where our origin should be. All right. So right now the default's 50-50. All right. And if we wanted, we can kind of take this little point and drag that around. Now, what you'll notice is there's a point at each time it animates. There's a point for the star and there's a point for the square. And it kind of changes based on, what you're doing. So if it's going, you can have different points going from star to square and square to star. Okay. So you'll notice that when the star is red, the point, or when the star is active, the point is red. When the square is active, the point is kind of a blue color. And if you click and hold, you can kind of move that point around, and then you can find the exact point at which you want things to be animated at. If you notice right below, this is the exact points that you would then copy and paste into your transform origin. Okay. So yeah, I think for this one, we're going to stick with 50-50. But I wanted to show you that. All right. So the last step here is to pre-compile our morph. And essentially what this does is it pre-compiles all of the calculations for the animation. Therefore, Drift and Greensock doesn't have to do that on page load, right? So we're pre-compiling all of this so we get faster page loads and better, smoother animations. So how do we do that? First off, you turn on the precompile morph setting. Then you ensure this log path to browser console is turned on. Then all we need to do is preview in the browser. When you open up the DevTools, you will see that inside there is this big string of, it says precompile and a bunch of SVG paths. Essentially what we're going to do is we're going to copy that. We're going to go back into our project, and then we're going to paste it into RapidWeaver. Now, we are going to have to make sure that you erase this precompile colon from the very beginning. Okay, so it should look something like this. It should start and end with square brackets. Then we're going to want to turn off the log because we've already done that part. We've pasted in our precompiled path. Then if we preview our animation again, it's now a precompiled animation. So that now the Morph plugin doesn't need to actually calculate all that again. It's done. Now, you only want to do this step once you are 100% sure that your animation is done and complete, and you don't want to modify it any further. So if you remember when we created this SVG, there were multiple shapes here. So what if I wanted to take that one SVG shape and then start animating it to all of them and create a little animation SVG loop? So essentially, all we're going to do is we're going to build out a timeline of morphs. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and copy and paste this. And so here we're going square to star in the first one. Well, in the second one, you'd think we want to go from star to heart. Okay. And then you think, okay, well, now I want to go from heart to circle. And then lastly, to finish the loop, we'll go from circle back to square. Okay. This is probably what you would think would happen. Let's show you what this actually does. It changes everything. It doesn't do anything what I thought it was going to do, Joe. What's going on here? Well, okay. Let's think about this. In step 1, we're telling Morph SVG to, hey, take the square and make it the shape of the star. And then in step 2, we're saying take the star and make it the shape of a heart. But that's not what we want, because the square is what we started with, and the square is now the shape of a star. So what we want to do is, even though the square is the shape of a star, we want now the square to be the shape of a heart. And then we want the square to be the shape of a circle. And then we want the square to go back to being a square. Okay? Hopefully that makes sense. So you're going to be animating the same thing. You're just changing the shape of it. So let's go ahead and preview that. And there we go. We now have the one single shape animating and morphing in between each of the shapes in our SVG. Now, you're probably going to want to go through and do the precompiled path for each individual step. Okay, that's going to be very important to get the most performance out of this. And you might want to change, debug the custom shape index and the origins and all that jazz. Okay, I'm not going to do that here, but as you see, that is a great thing to do. Okay, I strongly urge you to do that. Now, one other thing, this particular SVG actually had colors into it. I probably would recommend that you not put fill colors in your SVG. So I'm going to go ahead and let's just remove these fill colors here inside the SVG. I mean, they're nice so we can see things, but I'm going to go ahead and remove this style fill equals everything here. All right, let's do that. And then at that point, you can use, if you're using Foundation 6, the SVG stack, you can then use the fill color to customize the actual color of everything, right? So now we got, everything's purple. Now this is obviously going very fast. Another thing that you could do is, between each of these last 3 steps, add a delay. So if we did like a 2-second delay here, we then preview that. Much nicer, right? So now you get the shape for a little bit, and then it delays and it morphs. That heart to circle is actually really cool. And the circle to square is very nice too. I like that. So pretty cool. I hope you enjoy Morph. It's very interesting. The only thing, kind of the only caveat was these paths, I think was, getting these converted, if you're using the shape tools in Affinity or, other tools to get the SVG exported as path. That would be really awesome. Okay, so after recording this, I couldn't stand it. I needed to fix this. And there were 2 things I wanted to fix. First, exporting these as paths. I figured it out. The next thing is, remember when we animated this square to star? I was never happy with that initial animation. So I wanted to make that better. So first off, let's go back into Affinity Designer. So first off, let's teach you how you can get these to be paths. So essentially, just as before, you do want to right click and say convert to curves. Okay, that's a requirement. Next off, if you double click, on it, you then basically enter into curve editing mode inside Affinity Designer, and you can add new points. So what Affinity was doing is it's noticed, hey, you have this path. I see it has 4 points. It looks like a square. We're going to export this as a rectangle. Okay. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a point along the path, and I'm going to be very purposeful here because I know I'm going to be modifying or morphing this square to be the star. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a point along the path of this square at the point of the star. And what that's going to allow me to do is it's going to allow this to be the origin point to get a much nicer animation. Now you could argue that maybe you could add another point down here at the middle. So this point will then nicely navigate up to this point of the star. Okay. And then maybe if we were to add another one here in the middle of the square here, and maybe another point lastly over here, what's happening is I'm now adding more points to this square, which is going to give GSAP or green sock or drift less work on animating. So this point here, let's go ahead and hide this circle. This point here is going to maybe animate to here. This one's going to maybe animate to here. So it just gives us a lot more. But the main point is our starting point, right? This starting point is a big one because it doesn't need to create some artificial point over here, which it was doing earlier to animate to this point. It's going to anchor off that right there. Okay. So that's point number 1. Then we're going to go to circle. Okay. And then I'm going to do the same exact thing. I'm just going to create some arbitrary point on the circle and I'm going to click on it. Okay. I'm not going to move it because I still want it to be a circle. Just clicking on it keeps it to be a circle. Okay. But because it has more points than what Affinity is thinking is going to be there, when I export this, it's going to export all of these as a path. So let's give that a shot. We're going to go File, Export. Going to export as an SVG. Call this Morph 2. Place it. And victory. Right? Victory. I have all of my paths here. And yeah, let's go ahead and test this. I'm excited. So now I'm here inside my WrapWeaver project. I'm going to paste in our newly generated SVG from Affinity that has all paths. And let's preview this. Oh, look at that. Score. I love it. And if you notice that transition of here, let's go ahead and I'm going to delete these other ones. I'm just going to focus on that square to star for right now. Okay. And I'm also going to make it hover so we can make it go multiple times. All right. Look, that animation is sweet. And I think adding that point on the bottom really helped because it makes that one point go up, right? So it gives less guesswork for Drift to calculate this animation because we already have all the points that we need. And the automatic, we don't even need to use the shape index debug tool because it automatically figured out that that point we had is the correct one to start with, right? Super stoked about that. Cool. Well, I hope you enjoy Morph. This is really awesome. You can do amazing things with this. And yeah, thanks for sticking along. Go watch all of the other Drift videos. We have tons of them. Maybe I'll record more after this one, but this is the last one. Hang out. 45 minutes. I got to hang out, guys. Make sure you join the Hangouts every Fridays. Super fun. A lot of time. Hopefully I'll see you guys there. Take care, everyone. Enjoy Drift. We'll see you later. Go out there and make your websites great.